Ethan was only 10 years old, but life had forced him to grow much older inside. The old house he lived in was quiet, dusty, and full of memories he wished he could keep and forget at the same time. The wooden floors creaked under his small footsteps, and every sound echoed through the empty rooms. It wasn't silence he feared, it was the kind of silence that reminded him he was alone. After his parents died in a sudden accident, Ethan refused to let anyone take him away. He remembered the day the officer came to the door, his hat in his hands, his face sad as he spoke words Ethan could barely understand. Everything after that moment became blurry, the crying, the confusion, the dark nights where he stayed awake wishing his parents would walk in through the door again. When the neighbors reported smoke from the stove one night, social workers showed up, trying to find out who was living in the house. Ethan hid, scared they would take him away too. He had lived in this house since he was born. He knew every corner, every sound, every loose window that let in the cold wind. Even though it was falling apart, this place was still his home. This old, broken house held the memories of happier days. His mother's soft singing, his father's laughter, the sound of breakfast dishes clattering in the kitchen. Even if those moments hurt to remember, they were the last pieces of his family he had left. Ethan taught himself how to survive. He cooked simple meals, mostly noodles or bread, because they were easy and didn't need much effort. He filled water bottles days in advance so he wouldn't forget. He washed his clothes in a small bucket and hung them outside to dry. When electricity stopped working in some parts of the house, he moved into the safest room where the lights still functioned. He learned to fix small things like broken latches and leaking pipes, but some things were too big for him to repair. The nights were the hardest. The wind howled through the thin walls. The house made strange noises that made him feel like someone else was walking inside. Sometimes he would curl up under his blanket and hum softly to himself, pretending his mother was still there to sing him to sleep. On those nights, loneliness felt like a heavy blanket wrapped around him. He rarely left the house during the day. He was afraid someone would notice he was alone and call the authorities. He knew that if they found out, they might send him to an orphanage or a foster home far away. He couldn't bear losing this house too. It was all he had left of his parents. So he stayed quiet, hidden, hoping no one would notice a child living alone. He became good at avoiding people. When someone knocked on the door, he stayed silent. When the mailman came, he waited until the footsteps disappeared before opening the door. He avoided looking out of windows during the daytime. He only went to the backyard early in the mornings when everyone else was asleep. But the quiet was beginning to wear on him. He missed hearing voices, laughter, or even simple conversations. Sometimes he imagined talking to his parents, asking them what he should do, but he only heard his own trembling voice answering back. His small world felt like it was getting smaller each day. Then one afternoon something strange happened. Ethan heard the sound of engines outside, big trucks, doors slamming, and people talking loudly. He froze. Slowly he walked to the window, careful not to be seen, and peeked through a small crack in the curtain. There were moving trucks parked next door. A family was stepping out, a woman with warm eyes, a man with strong arms carrying boxes, and a teenage girl with bright hair. They looked happy, talking casually as they walked around the front yard, pointing at things and smiling. Their voices filled the air, lively, warm, and full of energy. For the first time in years, Ethan saw life so close to him. He stepped back, unsure how he felt. Part of him was curious. Part of him was scared. New neighbors meant new eyes, new questions, new risks. If they noticed he was alone, they might ask around. Someone might discover his secret. But another part of him, deep, lonely, aching, felt something else, hope. He had been alone for so long that the sight of a normal family made his heart twist. He wondered what it felt like to have people around you every day. People to talk to, laugh with, share meals with. Still, he told himself to stay hidden. To not get close. To not make noise. He pulled the curtains shut and stepped away from the window, but he couldn't stop thinking about them. The sound of their conversations floated through the thin walls, and for a moment, he imagined he was part of something bigger than his empty house. He lay in bed that night with his hands folded under his cheek, staring at the ceiling. The arrival of the new neighbors made him uneasy. It made him feel things he had pushed deep down, longing, curiosity, fear, hope. He didn't know if they were good or bad. He didn't know if they would notice him. But deep in his heart, something whispered that his life was about to change. He didn't know how or when or whether it would be good or terrible. All he knew was that the silence he had lived in for so long was finally breaking. And whatever happened next would be something he could never forget. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the cracked window, warming the dusty air of the old room. Normally, he didn't care much about mornings. Every day felt the same, quiet, cold, lonely. But today he remembered the moving trucks, the voices, the laughter, the new family. A strange mix of curiosity and fear tugged at his chest. He tiptoed toward the window again, careful not to show his face, and peeked through the tiny gap in the curtain. The new neighbors were already outside. The woman from yesterday, Mrs. Hayes, was watering plants, her brown hair tied in a loose bun. The teenage girl, Lily, was sitting on the porch steps with a notebook in her hands, tapping her pen against her knee as if thinking. She looked kind and relaxed, nothing like the adults Ethan had learned to fear. He pulled back slightly, heart thumping. Don't let them see you, he reminded himself. That had been his rule for months, stay invisible, stay safe. But his eyes kept drifting back to the window. Mrs. Hayes turned her head suddenly as if she felt eyes on her. Ethan jumped back, holding his breath. After a moment of silence, he slowly edged forward again. She wasn't looking at him, she was just smiling at her new garden. Ethan let out a quiet sigh of relief. Later that day he crept outside to check the mailbox. The air smelled fresh after last night's rain, and puddles glistened on the ground. He kept his steps quiet, scanning the street to make sure neighbors weren't watching. But when he reached the mailbox, a voice startled him. Hi. Ethan froze. His heart hammered as he turned his head slowly. Lily, the teenage girl, stood a few feet away. She wasn't smiling widely, just a small, gentle smile, like she didn't want to scare him. I live next door, she said softly. We moved in yesterday. Ethan swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. He didn't speak. He barely even breathed. Lily tilted her head slightly. I saw you peek from the window. Thought I should say hello. Her voice wasn't loud or pushy. It was warm in a way Ethan hadn't heard in a long time. He looked down quickly, gripping the mailbox. No one had spoken to him in weeks, not kindly anyway. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to act. She took a small step closer, but not too close, as if she understood he was nervous. I'm Lily, she continued. What's your name? Ethan shook his head. I can't talk, he whispered. Lily frowned softly. Why not? He didn't answer. How could he explain everything? His parents' death. The fear of being taken away. The promise he made to himself to stay hidden. Instead he whispered, I have to go, and turned back toward his house. But Lily didn't follow him. She just watched with a thoughtful expression. When Ethan entered his home, he leaned against the door, breathing fast. Why did she talk to me? What does she want? Did she notice I'm alone? The thoughts raced through his mind, filling him with worry. Hours passed, and Ethan stayed inside, too afraid to step out again. But something unexpected happened in the evening. When he opened the door to bring in his laundry from the backyard, he noticed a small basket placed neatly on the porch, a basket he knew wasn't his. Inside were fresh fruit, 2 bread rolls, a carton of juice, and a small sticky note. For you, from your new neighbors. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. His chest tightened. No one had given him anything since his parents died. He picked up the note again, reading the words slowly, touching them like they were something fragile. A wave of confusion hit him. Why would anyone leave food? Why would anyone care? He grabbed the basket and quickly brought it inside, afraid someone might see him. Once he shut the door, he sat on the floor and stared at the items. His stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten much in 2 days, but he hesitated. Was this a trap? Was someone testing him? Was someone watching? He hugged his knees tightly, battling between fear and hunger. After a long moment he whispered, They're kind? The idea felt strange. Dangerous even. But the bread smelled warm and soft, and he finally took a bite. It tasted like comfort. It tasted like something he hadn't felt in years, care. That night Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. He remembered Lily's gentle smile, her soft voice, and the basket of food. His heart felt confused, torn between fear and longing. For the first time in a very long time he wondered, what if the new neighbors aren't dangerous? What if they're different? What if they're here for a reason? He didn't know it yet, but that small basket was the beginning of something that would break his silence and change his entire life forever. Ethan woke up the next morning with the smell of fresh bread still lingering in his memory. He sat up slowly, rubbing his tired eyes. For months, his days had been predictable and empty, every moment heavy with silence. But now something had changed. The tiny basket on the table reminded him that someone out there had noticed him. Someone had cared enough to leave food. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. A part of him felt warm, like a small flame had lit inside his chest. Another part felt scared. Kindness was dangerous. Kindness made people curious. and curious people asked questions he couldn't answer. He stayed inside most of the morning, avoiding the windows. But as the afternoon light filled the room, his curiosity grew too strong to ignore. He moved the curtain slightly and peeked outside. Lily was in the yard again, tying her hair while talking to her mother. They were planting new flowers, laughing quietly as they worked. Ethan watched them closely, wondering what it felt like to have sunlight on your face while working with family. To have someone help you. To have someone talk to you. He didn't realize he was staring until Lily suddenly looked up. Their eyes met. Ethan ducked away instantly, heart pounding. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing fast. She saw me. She saw me again. He covered his face with his hands. Why did I look? Why did I let her see? Minutes passed and his heartbeat finally slowed, but his stomach twisted with nervousness. A gentle knock came at the front door. Ethan froze completely like a statue. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. He hoped, begged, that whoever it was would go away. But the knock came again, softer this time. Hello? Lily's voice drifted through the door. Ethan flinched. He looked at the door with wide eyes. Why was she here? What did she want from him? He backed up slowly, careful not to make a sound. I just wanted to return your basket, Lily said softly. You left it outside. Ethan blinked in confusion. He had forgotten the basket outside? He didn't even remember. Silence followed. Lily didn't leave. She just stood there waiting. Eventually she whispered, Are you okay? Ethan closed his eyes tightly. He wanted to answer. He wanted to say yes or no or please go, but no sound came out. His voice felt trapped inside him. It's all right if you don't want to talk, Lily said with a soft laugh. I talk too much anyway. Ethan opened one eye, surprised. She wasn't angry. She wasn't annoyed. She sounded patient. Kind. I made cookies, she added shyly. I thought maybe you'd want some. You don't have to open the door. I'll just leave them here. There was a soft rustling sound. Then footsteps walking away. Ethan waited a whole minute before approaching the door, moving slowly as if afraid it might bite him. He opened it just a little, enough to see a small paper bag on the porch. He looked in both directions. Lily was already gone. He picked up the bag cautiously. Inside were cookies. Not from a store. Real homemade cookies. Soft, warm, smelling like chocolate and comfort. His eyes stung unexpectedly. No one had baked for him since his mother. He took the bag inside, sat on the floor and held a cookie in his hand without eating it. Memories rushed back. The sound of his mother humming while baking, the way she'd laugh when he stole a cookie before they cooled. The warmth of those moments filled him with a kind of sadness he couldn't describe. He wiped his eyes quickly. Don't cry, he whispered to himself. Don't cry. He finally took a bite. The cookie melted in his mouth, warm and sweet. For a moment, the empty house didn't feel so cold. The next day, Ethan carefully left a small note outside his door. He didn't sign his name, but he wrote 2 simple words in shaky handwriting. Thank you. He didn't expect anyone to find it. But an hour later, he peeked outside and saw Lily holding the note in both hands, smiling softly. She pressed it against her chest like it meant something precious. Ethan stepped back from the window, confused and overwhelmed. Why would such a simple note make someone so happy? Later that afternoon, when Ethan opened his door to bring in the laundry, he found another note taped to the railing. You're welcome. And I'm here if you ever want to talk. Ethan held the note with trembling fingers. Talk. He had forgotten what talking to someone felt like. But somewhere deep inside, something stirred, a tiny hope he hadn't felt since losing his parents. He didn't know it yet, but Lily and her family were slowly breaking through the walls he had built around his heart. And soon his life would change in ways he never imagined. That night, heavy clouds gathered in the sky, swallowing the moon and stars. Ethan didn't pay much attention at first. Weather came and went, just like every silent day he had lived alone. But by late evening, the wind grew sharper, rattling the old windows of the house like angry fingers tapping against the glass. The walls creaked louder than usual, and lightning flashed across the sky, turning the room white for a second before plunging it back into darkness. Ethan pulled his knees to his chest and hugged them tightly. Storms always made him nervous. When his parents were alive, he used to run to their room, and his mother would pull him into her arms, whispering that storms were just the sky's way of talking. But now the house felt too big, too dark, too empty. He tried to distract himself by reading an old book, but the sound of thunder shaking the house made his hands tremble. Rain hammered on the roof like thousands of small stones falling at once. The electricity flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. The house sank into a frightening silence. Ethan lit a small candle, watching the flame dance nervously. He wrapped a blanket around himself and sat on the floor, but the storm outside only seemed to grow stronger. Then through the roar of the rain he heard something faint, something unfamiliar. At first he thought it was just the wind or a tree branch hitting the house. But then he heard it again. A voice. A soft, worried voice calling out from outside. "Hello? Are you all right?" Ethan froze. His breath caught. Was he imagining it? No. There it was again, louder this time. "Hello? Is anyone home?" It was a woman's voice. Mrs. Hayes. Ethan's heart pounded. Why was she here? Did she know he was alone? Did the storm reveal his secret? Panic raced through him. He stepped back, his mind screaming, "Don't open the door. Don't let her see you." But then lightning struck nearby, shaking the ground, and the house groaned loudly like it might collapse. Ethan's fear grew larger than his caution. Another strike followed, and the window near him shattered slightly, letting in cold rain. He covered his ears and whimpered. He was no longer thinking about rules or hiding. For the first time in months he felt like a child, terrified, vulnerable, desperate for help. The knocking on the door became urgent. "Please open the door," Mrs. Hayes shouted through the storm. "It's dangerous. Are you hurt?" The worry in her voice pushed through his fear. With shaking hands Ethan slowly approached the door. His breath came in short gasps. He turned the rusty lock and opened it just a few inches. Mrs. Hayes stood outside, soaked from head to toe. Her hair clung to her face, and her expression was full of concern. The moment she saw Ethan's frightened eyes peeking through the crack, she gasped. "Oh my goodness, you're all alone during this storm?" He didn't reply. He couldn't. His throat tightened with fear. "Sweetheart, can I come in?" she asked gently, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. Ethan hesitated, looking behind him at the dark house that suddenly felt like a cave. He looked back at her, then slowly opened the door wider. The moment she stepped inside, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them. Ethan flinched. Mrs. Hayes quickly knelt down to his level and gently touched his shoulders, but not forcefully, not in a way that would scare him. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head, tears filling his eyes. He had tried to be brave for so long, but the storm, the darkness, the loneliness, it all crashed down at once. A tiny sob escaped him. "Oh, sweetheart." Mrs. Hayes pulled him into a gentle hug. Ethan stiffened at first, not used to being held anymore, but then something inside him broke. He clung to her shirt and cried quietly, trembling against her. Mrs. Hayes held him until his breathing slowed. "I'm here now," she murmured softly. "You're not alone. You don't have to be scared." When he finally pulled away, she brushed his hair gently. "Have you really been living here all by yourself?" Ethan looked down and nodded slowly. Her eyes filled with sadness and shock. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you ask for help?" He whispered, "They'll take me away. They'll take the house." Mrs. Hayes took his hands. "No, honey. We're going to help you. But you can't stay alone like this. It's too dangerous." Lightning flashed again and thunder boomed. Ethan flinched and she held his hand tightly. "We're going to fix this," she promised. "You're safe now." In that moment Ethan didn't know what the future would bring. But one thing was clear. He wasn't invisible anymore. Someone had seen him. Someone cared. And everything was about to change. The storm finally calmed near dawn, leaving the old house soaked, cold, and darker than ever. Mrs. Hayes stayed with Ethan the entire night, sitting beside him with a flashlight while thunder rolled away into the distance. When morning light filtered through the cracked windows, she looked around the room more closely. The faded wallpaper, the broken shelves, the mattress lying on the floor, the small blanket wrapped around Ethan. Nothing looked safe for a child. Nothing looked like a home. "Ethan, how long have you been living like this?" she asked softly. Ethan stared at the damp floor. "A while." Mrs. Hayes swallowed hard. She wanted to hug him again, but she didn't want to frighten him. "Why didn't you tell anyone your parents passed away? Someone could have helped you." Tears gathered in Ethan's eyes, but he blinked them back quickly. "They'll take me away," he whispered. "I don't want to lose the house. It's all I have left." Mrs. Hayes felt something twist deeply inside her. She understood his fear. Losing his home would feel like losing his parents all over again. But letting him stay here alone, that wasn't an option anymore. "Ethan," she said gently, "you can't live alone. It's not safe. Kids need adults to look after them." "I can take care of myself," he said quickly, almost defensively. "I cook. I clean. I try." The way he said it broke her heart. "No child should have to try like this," she whispered. Ethan hugged his knees again, shrinking into himself. Mrs. Hayes placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I'm not here to take you away. I just want to help. And I promise whatever happens you won't be alone anymore. His lips trembled. Will they send me far away? She hesitated. The truth was complicated. Not if there's someone who wants to care for you properly, she said. Ethan didn't understand what that meant, but he felt a small flicker of hope. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Lily appeared at the door, panting slightly, her hair still messy from sleep. Mom? You left the house in the middle of the night. I woke up and... She stopped when she saw Ethan sitting on the floor, his eyes red. Oh, she whispered softly. Her whole expression softened. Are you okay? He nodded shyly. Lily stepped closer, kneeling beside him. I'm sorry the storm scared you, she said. I was scared too. Ethan blinked in surprise. He didn't expect someone older, stronger, and full of confidence to admit something like that. It made him feel a little less embarrassed. Mrs. Hayes stood up and looked around the room again. Lily, sweetie. Ethan has been living here alone. Lily gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Alone? But he's just a kid. Ethan stared at the floor again, feeling ashamed. But Lily didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him like someone who wanted to protect him. Mom, Lily said softly, we have to do something. Mrs. Hayes nodded. We will. But first, we need to talk to the right people. Ethan's body tensed. No, he whispered. Please. Don't call anyone. They'll take me away. Mrs. Hayes bent down and lifted his chin gently so he would look at her. Ethan, listen to me. The people I'm talking about, they exist to keep children safe. And if they see that you're surrounded by people who care about you, they won't just pull you away. Tears finally escaped Ethan's eyes. I don't want to lose everything. Lily wiped his cheek gently. You're not losing us, she whispered. For a long moment, Ethan just sat there between the two people who felt more like family than anyone had in years. Later that day, Mrs. Hayes made a call to a social worker she knew. Ethan sat in the corner, hugging his knees, listening to her talk. Her voice was calm but firm, clearly fighting for him. She explained the storm, the condition of the house, the fact that Ethan had been alone for months, and how he needed immediate help, not punishment. After the call, she came back to him. They'll be here soon, she said, brushing his hair gently. They want to talk to you, but I'll be right here. I won't leave your side, I promise. Ethan nodded slowly, fear still gripping him. But he also felt something else he hadn't felt in a long time, trust. When the door knocked and the social worker entered, Ethan instinctively moved closer to Mrs. Hayes. She placed a reassuring arm around him. The social worker knelt down and smiled kindly. Hi, Ethan. I'm here to help you, okay? He didn't answer, but he didn't run either. Mrs. Hayes squeezed his shoulder gently. You're safe. For the first time in months, Ethan believed that maybe, just maybe, he really was. Little did he know, the biggest change of his life was just beginning. The social worker's arrival changed the atmosphere inside the old house. The air felt heavier, the walls seemed to listen, and Ethan's heart thumped loudly in his chest. He stayed very close to Mrs. Hayes, gripping a handful of her sleeve like a frightened child clinging to the last bit of safety he knew. The social worker, Miss Carter, noticed this immediately. Instead of stepping closer, she sat on the floor a few feet away, lowering herself to his level. It's nice to meet you, Ethan, she said softly. I heard you've been very brave. Ethan didn't speak. His throat tightened again and he hid partially behind Mrs. Hayes. He didn't know this woman. Kindness scared him almost as much as coldness. He felt exposed, fragile, like one wrong sentence could decide his fate. Miss Carter didn't push him. She slowly looked around the room. The cracked walls, the mattress on the floor, the tiny candle still melted from last night's storm. She sighed quietly, her heart breaking at the sight. You've been surviving here alone, haven't you? Ethan looked down, his silence confirming everything. Mrs. Hayes placed a gentle hand on his back. It's okay to tell her the truth, she whispered. She's here to help. Ethan lifted his head slightly, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to go away. Miss Carter's face softened. I understand, she said. Losing your parents was already painful enough. You didn't want to lose your home too. Ethan nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Miss Carter slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and pen. Ethan, I'm going to ask you some questions, but you can nod or shake your head if you don't want to talk. Is that okay? He nodded slowly. Have you been eating every day? A tiny nod. Do you have anyone who checks on you? A shake of his head. Do you feel scared living alone? His lip trembled. He nodded again. Miss Carter closed her eyes for a second, holding back her emotion. She had seen difficult cases before, but something about Ethan, his small size, his quiet bravery, the way he clung to Mrs. Hayes, touched her deeply. Lily entered quietly and sat beside her mother, watching Ethan with worry in her eyes. She whispered, "He doesn't have to go anywhere, right?" But her voice cracked slightly, betraying her fear. Miss Carter turned to both of them. "That depends," she said honestly. "Children cannot live alone. That's the law." "But," she looked at Mrs. Hayes, "if someone trustworthy comes forward to care for him, he doesn't need to leave the community." Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes widened in surprise and hope. For the first time he leaned forward. "Really?" he whispered. Miss Carter nodded with a small smile. "Really?" Mrs. Hayes placed her hand over Ethan's. "I would do it," she said softly but firmly. "I will take care of him." Ethan blinked, stunned. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Lily smiled warmly. "Yeah, you can stay with us. We have an extra room. And Mom makes really good pancakes." Ethan stared at them in disbelief. The words felt unreal. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something so unfamiliar it frightened him. Hope. Miss Carter stood up slowly. "Mrs. Hayes, if you are truly willing, we can start the emergency guardianship process today. Ethan can't stay here alone anymore." Mrs. Hayes nodded without hesitation. "He won't spend another night alone." Ethan's breath shook. "But, my house," he whispered, looking around at the dusty walls, the broken window, the floor where he learned to survive without anyone. "We'll come back for your things," Mrs. Hayes said gently. "And this house will always be a part of your memories. But you don't have to live your life inside old pain." Ethan swallowed hard. The thought of leaving scared him, but staying alone scared him more. He looked at Lily, who smiled and gave a tiny wave. "I can show you my room," she said softly. "It's not scary at all." Ethan looked up at Mrs. Hayes next. She knelt down and hugged him carefully. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Ethan. You deserve a home filled with warmth. Let us help you." Something inside Ethan broke, not in a painful way but like a wall collapsing after holding too much sadness. Tears slipped down his cheeks and he nodded against her shoulder. "I don't want to be alone," he whispered. "You won't be," she promised. Miss Carter smiled. "Then let's take you somewhere safe." With shaking legs but a lighter heart, Ethan stood up. He took one last look around the old, silent house, the only world he had known since losing his parents. Then he reached out and held Mrs. Hayes' hand. He didn't know exactly what was waiting for him, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. Miss Carter led Ethan and the Hayes family outside, and for a moment Ethan paused on the porch of the old house. The storm had left the ground muddy, and water dripped from the broken gutters. The house looked even older in the morning light, its peeling paint, cracked windows, sagging roof. It had protected him for months, but now he saw it clearly for the first time, not as a safe place but as a lonely one. A place full of memories, yes, but also full of shadows. Lily noticed him staring back and gently touched his arm. "You don't have to say goodbye to it forever," she whispered. "Just, for now." Ethan nodded slowly. His fingers tightened around the small backpack he carried. Inside it were the only things he owned: 2 shirts, a worn blanket, and an old photo of his parents. Mrs. Hayes opened the car door. "Ready?" she asked, her voice warm and steady. Ethan hesitated, then climbed inside. As the car drove away, he stared out the window, watching the house shrink behind him until it became just a small shape in the distance. His chest tightened, but strangely there was also relief, like a heavy weight was slowly slipping off his shoulders. When they arrived at the Hayes home, Ethan expected to feel like a stranger. Instead, he stepped into a hallway filled with warm lights, the smell of pancakes and quiet laughter coming from the kitchen. It didn't feel like a house. It felt like something he hadn't felt in a long time, a home. "You must be hungry," Lily said, carrying a plate of warm pancakes topped with a little butter. "Mom makes the best ones." Ethan blinked. Warm food. Not cold cereal. Not dry bread. Not something he had to cook alone over a weak stove. Real warm pancakes. Mrs. Hayes pulled out a chair. "Sit, sweetheart." He sat slowly, unsure. She placed the plate in front of him, and Ethan stared at it like it might disappear if he blinked. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the fork. "Go on," Lily encouraged. Ethan took a small bite. The moment the food touched his tongue, his eyes watered. It was warm, soft, sweet. His throat tightened and he looked down quickly so no one would see the tears forming. Mrs. Hayes noticed anyway. She touched his shoulder lightly. "It's all right to feel," she whispered. "You've been carrying too much alone." For the first time in a long time, Ethan let a few tears fall while he ate, and no one made him feel ashamed. They simply stayed nearby, giving him space, giving him safety. After breakfast, Lily showed Ethan the guest room. It was small but bright, with clean sheets, a soft comforter, and a window that opened to a garden full of flowers. A wooden bookshelf stood against the wall, half filled with storybooks. "We didn't know what you liked," Lily said shyly. "But you can add whatever you want." Ethan stepped inside slowly, touching the mattress gently. It felt soft. No, say, nothing like the thin mattress he slept on at the old house. He turned to them, his voice trembling. "Can I really stay here?" Mrs. Hayes smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart. As long as you need." Ethan swallowed hard. "What if they say no later? What if they take me away?" Her smile softened. "Then we'll fight for you." Lily nodded firmly. "We're on your side." Ethan felt something unfamiliar in his chest, a swelling warmth that almost scared him. No one had ever said they would fight for him before. No one had ever stayed long enough to care. Later that afternoon, Miss Carter returned to check on him. She found him sitting on the porch with Lily, watching butterflies dance over the flowers. "You look better," Miss Carter said gently. Ethan nodded. "It's nice here." Miss Carter knelt beside him. "I'm happy you feel safe. Next week we'll have a preliminary meeting about your future. But don't worry, Mrs. Hayes has already begun the paperwork." Ethan looked at the Hayes family standing together behind him. Mrs. Hayes gave him a reassuring nod. Lily gave him a playful thumbs up. "See," Lily whispered. "You're not going anywhere." Ethan felt his throat tighten again. For months he had believed the world had forgotten him. Now he realized there were people willing to fight for him, protect him, and stand beside him. That night, after the sun had set, Ethan sat in his new bed. He held the photo of his parents and whispered a shaky promise, "I'll be okay now. I found people who care." For the first time since they died. Ethan fell asleep without fear, without hunger, and without loneliness. And in the morning, his life would begin to change in ways he never imagined. Ethan woke up the next morning feeling something he had almost forgotten: peace. The sunlight entering the room felt gentle instead of frightening. The sheets were soft, the house smelled like warm breakfast, and distant voices drifted through the hallway. For the first time in months he didn't wake up because of fear, cold, or hunger. He woke up because his body finally felt safe enough to rest. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, half wondering if yesterday had been a dream. But when he looked around, the clean room, the flower-patterned curtains, the little bookshelf, he knew it was real. He wasn't in the old lonely house anymore. And he wasn't alone. He stepped out into the hallway quietly, unsure if he was allowed to walk freely, but Lily spotted him immediately. "You're up," she said, smiling as if seeing him made her day better. Ethan nodded shyly. "Good morning." Mrs. Hayes appeared from the kitchen holding a plate. "Good morning, sweetheart. Are you hungry?" Ethan nodded again, and she placed a warm plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. He sat at the table carefully, almost scared to touch anything. But Mrs. Hayes noticed and said softly, "You don't have to be careful here. This is your home too." Her words landed slowly in his chest, warm and heavy in a good way. Oh. He hadn't heard that word directed at him in a long time. After breakfast, Miss Carter arrived with papers in her hand. Ethan froze instinctively. The sight of official people still scared him, but Mrs. Hayes placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's here for good news," she promised. Miss Carter sat down with them in the living room. "Ethan," she said gently, "I spoke with my office. We reviewed everything. You won't be going anywhere far. We've approved temporary guardianship to the Hayes family until the adoption hearing." Ethan blinked. "Temporary means I stay?" "Yes," Miss Carter smiled. "You stay." Lily clapped her hands excitedly. "I told you. You're not going anywhere." Mrs. Hayes hugged him tightly. Ethan stiffened for a moment, then melted into her arms. He didn't cry this time, not because he wasn't emotional, but because something inside him finally felt steady. After Miss Carter left, the Hayes house turned into a small celebration. They didn't throw a big party or decorate the house. They simply spent the day together. Lily showed Ethan how to make paper airplanes. Mrs. Hayes baked cookies with him, letting him stir the dough while she held the bowl steady. Ethan laughed, a soft, hesitant laugh at first, then a louder one when Lily's paper airplane hit her mom in the back of the head. Mrs. Hayes pretended to be offended. "You two are troublemakers." Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. As evening came, the sky turned orange, painting the neighborhood in warm colors. Ethan and Lily sat on the porch steps watching the sunset. She nudged him gently. "So, how does it feel?" she asked. Ethan looked thoughtful. "Different," he whispered. "Good, but different." "You'll get used to it," she said softly. "And if you get scared or sad or anything, just tell us, okay?" Ethan nodded. "I will." They sat quietly, letting the warmth of the moment sink in. The world felt softer now, less frightening. That night, Mrs. Hayes tucked Ethan into bed for the first time. She brushed his hair back from his forehead and asked, "Do you need anything?" Ethan held the photo of his parents close. "Can I put this on the table?" "Of course," she said, placing it gently beside the lamp. "They'd be proud of you, you know." Ethan swallowed hard. "Do you think so?" She nodded with a warm smile. "Absolutely." Ethan lay back and whispered, "I miss them, but I feel safe here." "You are safe," she whispered. "And you're loved." She kissed the top of his head and turned off the light. For the first time since his parents' death, Ethan didn't fall asleep wishing for someone to hold him. He fell asleep knowing someone would be there in the morning. Days passed, then weeks. The house became filled with laughter, school supplies, bedtime stories, and warm dinners. The old silent house across the street remained empty, but Ethan no longer looked at it with fear or loneliness, only memories. When the adoption hearing finally came, Ethan walked into the court holding Mrs. Hayes' hand tightly. Lily walked beside him, smiling proudly. The judge reviewed the papers, looked at Ethan, and then at the Hayes family. "Is this what you want?" she asked. Ethan nodded firmly. "Yes, this is my family." And with the stroke of a pen, the judge made it official. Ethan Hayes. He had a new name, a new family, a new beginning. As they walked out of the courtroom together, Ethan looked up at Mrs. Hayes and said softly, "Thank you for choosing me." She hugged him tightly. "Sweetheart, we didn't choose you." She pulled back slightly and smiled. "You chose us when you opened that door." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt whole. And the silent house in his past became just that, the past. His future was warm, full, and finally filled with love.